On the quiet edge of a distant colony world, the day began like any other. Soft winds moved across the silver grass, and strange birds circled in wide loops above the tall rock towers. No one expected trouble, and no one imagined that their peaceful morning would soon turn into the most terrifying event the colony had ever seen. The humans who lived there believed they understood the planet. They believed they understood danger. But on that day, something new arrived from the sky and everything changed forever. Far across the fields, a deep sound rolled through the air, like metal grinding against stone. People stepped out of their shelters and looked toward the horizon. A dark shape was falling from the clouds, spinning slowly as sparks burst from its surface. For a moment, it almost looked like a dying star. Then the object crashed into the forest with a violent flash of light. Birds screamed and fled in all directions. Smoke rose in a tall column, twisting like a wounded serpent. The ground shook hard enough to knock tools from hands and cups from tables. Nobody knew what the object was. Nobody knew if it was a ship, a weapon, or something alive. But everyone understood one thing. Whatever had arrived was nothing friendly. At the center of the colony, a young girl named Lyra was helping her guardian pack supply crates. She was small, quick, and clever, always asking questions and never afraid to explore the strange world around her. But when the crash came, she froze. The sound seemed to reach straight into her chest. Even the honey badger beside her lifted its head, ears twitching. The creature was not a normal honey badger. It was larger, stronger, and far more intelligent, adapted over generations to survive harsh alien environments. Lyra called him Bristle, and he had protected her since the day she learned to walk. Now Bristle growled, low and deep, as if he sensed something far worse than falling metal. Lyra grabbed her pack and looked toward the forest, her heart beating faster with every passing second. In the forest itself, shadows moved. The crash had awoken something that had been sleeping deep below the roots. The trees shivered as if a cold wave passed through them. Strange shapes glided between the trunks, silent and smooth like living weapons. These creatures were known by many names across the galaxy, but all stories agreed on one thing: they feared nothing. They were built for war, born without the ability to hesitate. Their bodies carried armor like skin, and their eyes glowed faintly like molten iron. When they found the crashed object, they formed a circle around it. The metal shell opened with a hiss, sending steam curling through the air. The creatures leaned forward, curious but unafraid. Something inside the broken craft was alive, and it was moving. Back at the colony, alarms began to ring. Humans rushed toward shelters, grabbing children and supplies. Soldiers activated their shields and prepared to investigate the crash site. But before any organized response could begin, Lyra slipped away from the crowd. She did not want to hide underground. She wanted to understand what had fallen from the sky. Bristle followed her closely, bumping her leg as if warning her to be careful. Lyra whispered that they would not go too close, but the words felt thin and weak. She knew curiosity was pulling her forward faster than caution could hold her back. The forest grew darker as the pair entered its edge. Strange lights flickered in the distance, shimmering like reflections on water even though no water was near. Lyra felt watched, but she kept moving. She believed she could return before anyone noticed she was gone. But she was wrong. Something was already approaching her location. Heavy steps moved across the forest floor. Branches bent and snapped. Bristle pushed Lyra behind a fallen log, his fur rising like needles. A figure appeared between the trees, tall and armored, with glowing eyes that cut through the shadows. It was one of the war creatures, and it was searching for something, or someone. But the creature was not the only danger near them. The crashed craft behind it stirred again. A second shape crawled from the broken metal, smaller but quicker, moving like a frightened animal. For the first time since their creation, the war creatures hesitated. They were made without fear, yet something about the new shape made them step back. Lyra peeked from behind the log, confused. She saw the small being stumble and fall, struggling as if injured. It made a soft sound, almost like a cry. Before she could stop herself, Lyra stepped forward. Bristle growled, but she whispered that the creature needed help. The war creature turned sharply toward her, its eyes narrowing. It took a heavy step in her direction. Bristle leapt in front of Lyra, teeth bared, ready to fight even though he was small compared to the towering alien. The alien paused, surprised by the little animal's fearless challenge. Then another sound came from deeper in the forest, more footsteps, more shapes moving quickly. Lyra realized that the single war creature was not alone. Many more were coming, drawn by the noise of the crash. The small figure near the broken craft tried to crawl toward Lyra, reaching out with a trembling hand. She took one careful step forward, unsure if she was helping or making things worse. Bristle did not move from her side. His body was tense, ready to defend her with everything he had. Leaves rustled behind them. A cold wind swept through the trees. The war creature leaned closer, its glowing eyes locked on the girl and the honey badger. In that moment, Lyra understood that she had walked into something far bigger than she ever imagined. Something was waking on this planet, and none of them were ready for it. The forest waited as danger slowly gathered around them all. The forest grew colder as Lyra stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. The strange injured being near the crashed craft kept reaching toward her, its small hand shaking with weakness. Bristle stayed in front of her, his teeth still showing, his body stiff like a shield. The war creature towering above them did not move at first. Its glowing eyes stayed fixed on the girl, flickering like a forge ready to ignite. Every second felt longer than the last, and the silence between them was heavy enough to crush breath from the air. Then something unexpected happened. The war creature tilted its head, as if confused. It made a low clicking sound, a signal meant for others of its kind. Deep in the forest, similar clicks answered. Lyra could not understand the meaning, but she felt the change in the air. Whatever was coming, it was coming fast. Bristle stepped closer to the creature, fearless but cautious, sniffing the ground and watching its every move. The small injured being near the crashed ship let out another soft cry. Lyra felt her heart twist. The creature looked young, almost childlike, with thin limbs and pale skin that shimmered faintly under the forest's dim light. Its eyes were wide, filled with fear and pain. Lyra wanted to help it, even though she knew nothing about it, not its species, not its purpose, not the danger it might bring. Her instincts spoke louder than her fear. She slowly stepped closer. The war creature reacted instantly, taking one thunderous step forward that shook leaves from the branches above. Bristle snarled so loudly that even the creature paused. Lyra raised her hands in a calm gesture, trying to show she meant no harm. Her voice was barely more than a whisper as she told the creature she only wanted to help. She did not know if it understood her, but something in the creature's stance changed. It no longer looked ready to attack, but it also did not step aside. Behind them, more figures began to appear between the trees. Their bodies glided through the shadows, silent and deadly. One after another, the war creatures formed a loose circle around the crash site. Lyra counted at least 7, maybe more she couldn't see. Their eyes glowed like burning coals in the dark. These were creatures bred for war, and they were closing in. Bristle moved to Lyra's side, nudging her leg gently. The gesture told her everything she needed to know. They had to move, and fast, but the injured being needed help. Lyra knelt beside it. The creature tried to lift its head, whispering something in a language she had never heard. She could not understand the words, but the fear in its voice was clear. She placed a hand on its arm and promised she would not leave it. Bristle sniffed the creature and did not growl, which surprised Lyra. If Bristle did not sense danger from it, then maybe it truly needed protection. A sharp metallic cry tore through the air. One of the war creatures stepped forward, lowering its body like a predator preparing to strike. It seemed to be the leader, larger than the others and covered in thicker armor-like plates. Its eyes glowed brighter than the rest. It let out another cry, this one harsher, more commanding. The circle tightened. The leader pointed one claw at Lyra before turning it toward the injured being. Even without understanding their language, Lyra felt the meaning. They wanted the injured one. They did not want her to interfere. Lyra shook her head firmly. She lifted the small creature in her arms, struggling under its light but awkward weight. Some of the war creatures stepped back in surprise. The leader did not. It let out a roar that echoed through the trees. Bristle braced himself in front of Lyra, fur rising like blades. He looked tiny compared to the towering creatures, but there was something in his eyes, a fire that even monsters could feel. The leader lunged. Bristle jumped forward with explosive force. The impact was loud, like stone hitting metal. Bristle's claws scraped across the creature's armored skin. The alien stumbled back, shocked more than hurt. None of the war creatures expected a small animal to meet their attack head-on. The leader hissed, furious, and tried again, but Bristle was quicker, circling around it and snapping at its legs. His movements were fierce, fast, and wild, each attack filled with fearless energy. Lyra took her chance. Holding the injured being tightly, she ran deeper into the forest, branches whipping past her face and roots grabbing at her boots. She did not dare look back, but she heard the chaos behind her. Bristle roared and snarled, the war creatures hissed and growled, and the forest shook with their clash. She kept running, even when her legs felt heavy and her breath came in sharp gasps. The forest thickened as she moved farther. Strange blue flowers glowed softly along the ground, lighting her path. She stumbled once but managed to stay upright. The injured creature whimpered in her arms, trembling with each step she took. She whispered to calm it, promising everything would be all right even though she did not know if it was true. Finally, when her legs couldn't carry her any farther, she reached a small hollow beneath a large fallen tree. She slipped into the space and gently placed the injured being beside her. The creature looked up at her with grateful eyes, though pain still clouded its expression. Lyra pressed a hand to its chest, feeling its weak heartbeat. She wished she had medical supplies. She wished she had not run off alone. But the only thing she could do now was keep the creature safe until Bristle returned. The forest sounds grew louder again. Heavy footsteps, branches breaking, strange metallic cries echoing in the distance. Lyra held her breath, listening. She did not know if the war creatures were searching for her or fighting Bristle. She did not know if Bristle was winning or losing. All she knew was that danger was still moving toward her. She wrapped her arms around the injured creature and waited, her heart racing like a drum in her chest. The hollow beneath the fallen tree felt small and fragile as Lyra sat with the injured creature resting against her side. The air inside was cool and smelled of damp earth and glowing flowers. Lyra kept listening for any sign of Bristle, but every sound felt distant and unclear. Her heart beat so loudly that she feared the war creatures would hear it through the forest floor. The injured being breathed slowly, its chest rising and falling with effort. Lyra brushed dirt from its face and whispered that help would come soon. She said it softly, more to comfort herself than the creature. A sudden ripple spread across the ground like a wave. Lyra stiffened. She pressed her back against the trunk, trying to stay hidden. Heavy footsteps approached, each step falling like a hammer. Twigs snapped, bushes rustled, and leaves shook loose from branches above. Lyra held the creature close, her fingers trembling. A deep growl echoed through the forest. It was familiar. It was Bristle, but he sounded exhausted. His growls were low and uneven, broken by short breaths. Lyra peeked through a gap in the bark. Bristle came staggering into view, his fur matted, cuts running along his sides. His body shook with each step, but his eyes still burned with the same fighting spirit. Behind him, two war creatures followed. Their movements were slower now, cautious. One held its arm against its chest, where Bristle's claws had scratched deep into its armor-like skin. The other limped slightly, its glowing eyes flickering. Bristle turned toward them, baring his teeth once more. He roared, though the sound was weaker than before. The creatures hesitated. Even wounded, Bristle looked ready to attack again. Lyra's eyes filled with tears at the sight of him. She wanted to run to him, but she could not risk exposing the injured being beside her. The war creatures spread out, forming a half-circle around Bristle. Their bodies lowered, claws clicking against the ground. Bristle braced himself. He seemed to know the fight was not over. Lyra covered her mouth to keep from crying out. She could not watch him fight alone again. The small creature beside her placed a trembling hand on her arm. Its skin glowed faintly, and for the first time Lyra felt a strange warmth coming from it. The creature whispered something she could not understand. Then it touched the ground with its fingers. The soil glowed softly, and a faint pulse moved outward, like a quiet heartbeat spreading through the earth. Outside the hollow, the war creatures stepped back in surprise. Their eyes flickered brighter as if they sensed something new. The forest itself seemed to react. The glowing flowers brightened and the wind shifted, carrying a strange humming sound. Bristle tilted his head, sensing the change. The injured being continued pressing its hand against the ground, eyes closed, focusing with all its remaining strength. Lyra watched in awe as a thin layer of light wrapped around the creature's body, healing some of the wounds on its chest. The war creatures suddenly roared in anger. The leader, the largest one, emerged from the trees behind them. It was still furious from their earlier battle. Its armor-like plates were scratched deeply by Bristle's claws, and its glowing eyes burned like molten stone. It let out a thunderous cry that shook the branches above. The injured being opened its eyes, fear returning instantly. Its glowing hand dimmed weakly. Whatever strength it had used, it was already fading. The leader pointed directly toward Bristle and charged. The impact sent a shockwave through the forest floor. Bristle dodged to the side just in time, though his legs nearly gave out. The creature lunged again, its claws slicing through the dirt where Bristle had stood a heartbeat earlier. Lyra pressed herself against the tree, tears threatening to fall as she watched Bristle's desperate movements. He was fast, but he was growing slower with every moment. The leader roared again, shaking off dust and leaves. The injured being beside Lyra whispered urgently. It seemed to realize Bristle could not survive alone. Lyra did not know what to do, but she knew she had to do something. She reached into her pack and pulled out a small signal flare. She had taken it without thinking when she ran from the colony. Now, it was the only tool she had. She turned to the creature and pointed at the flare, then at Bristle. The being nodded weakly. Lyra took a deep breath and crawled out from the hollow. Bristle saw her immediately and growled in warning, telling her to go back. But Lyra shook her head and raised the flare high. She struck it against a rock. A bright red flame burst to life, shooting sparks into the air. The war creatures froze, turning their glowing eyes toward the sudden light. Lyra waved the flare, shouting, trying to draw their attention away from Bristle. The leader roared and charged at her. Bristle leapt between them with a burst of energy he should not have had left. He slammed into the leader's leg, forcing it off balance. Lyra stumbled backward but kept the flare raised. The light confused the war creatures. They stepped back, reluctant to approach. Their eyes flickered more rapidly as if the brightness disturbed their senses. Lyra shouted again, lifting the flare higher. The leader swung its arm, knocking Bristle across the clearing. Lyra screamed, running toward him. The war creatures moved again, circling them. The injured being crawled from the hollow, struggling to stand. Its small body glowed faintly once more. It lifted both hands toward Lyra and Bristle, whispering something that sounded like a plea. A wave of light swept outward from its hands, gentle but powerful. It rolled across the clearing like a soft wind. The war creatures stiffened. Their glowing eyes dimmed. Their bodies shook as if fighting against an invisible force. For a moment they looked unsure, almost afraid. The leader let out a confused roar. It took a step back, something it had never done before. The light faded slowly, leaving the forest silent. Lyra knelt beside Bristle. His breathing was rough but steady. She stroked his fur, whispering that she would not leave him. The injured being collapsed again, drained of strength. The war creatures stood in place, staring at the trio with something unfamiliar burning inside their glowing eyes. For the first time in their existence, they felt uncertainty. Danger was not over. Something much bigger was coming. The forest stayed still after the strange wave of light faded. Lyra held Bristle close, listening to his heavy breathing. His sides rose and fell unevenly, but he was alive. She brushed her hand through his fur gently, whispering to him again and again. Bristle opened one eye halfway, tired but aware. His tail moved just enough to show he recognized her voice. Lyra felt relief wash over her chest, but it lasted only for a moment. The war creatures still stood around them. None of them moved. Their glowing eyes flickered slowly, as if they were trying to understand something they had never felt before. The injured creature lay a few feet away, its body weak from whatever energy it had used to push back the war creatures. Lyra crawled over to it, placing a hand on its shoulder. The creature opened its eyes slightly. It whispered something soft, almost like a melody. Lyra nodded even though she could not understand. She hoped the creature knew she was trying to protect it. The forest smelled of crushed plants and earth torn open by claws and impacts. Strange floating dust drifted through the air like tiny glowing insects. Everything felt quiet but not safe. The leader of the war creatures finally shifted its weight. Its armor-like plates scraped together with a harsh sound. Its eyes focused on the injured being, then on Lyra, then on Bristle. It seemed unsure of what to do next. The other creatures started to move as well, slowly, like they were waking from a dream. Lyra's heart beat faster. She did not know if the creatures would attack again or retreat. Bristle tried to stand but collapsed, his legs too weak. Lyra quickly supported him, begging him to stay still. His breath warmed her hands, reminding her of how fiercely he had fought. A deep thrum echoed through the forest, vibrating through the roots beneath their feet. The war creatures reacted instantly. They turned toward the sound, their bodies tensing. Another thrum followed, louder than before. The branches overhead shook and leaves fell like rain. Lyra felt the sound through her bones. It was something massive, something powerful, moving toward them. The leader let out a warning hiss, signaling the others to spread out. They formed a defensive half-circle, facing the direction of the approaching sound. The injured creature reached weakly toward Lyra and whispered urgently. Its voice trembled with fear. Lyra glanced at Bristle, then at the war creatures, then back at the forest path. Whatever was coming, even the fearless creatures were preparing for it. That realization filled her with cold dread. If creatures with no fear were bracing themselves, Then the threat was unlike anything she had encountered. The thrum grew louder, faster, and heavier. Trees shook violently as something enormous moved between them. Lyra held the injured being close. Bristle raised his head slightly, growling despite his pain. The war creatures tightened their formation, claws ready. Then something huge stepped into view. It towered over everything, trees, rocks, and even the leader of the war creatures. Its body was covered in thick bone-like plates. Its arms were long, ending in massive claws that could slice through stone. Its eyes glowed with a deep red light. The war creatures hissed in unison. The massive beast roared, sending a shockwave across the clearing. Lyra pressed her hands over her ears. The roar felt like it could shatter bone. Even the leader staggered back. The giant beast stepped forward, crushing branches and roots under its weight. Lyra could see the ground sink beneath its feet. It sniffed the air, then turned its gaze toward Lyra and the injured being. Its eyes narrowed. Lyra felt the temperature drop as fear crawled up her spine. The war creatures attacked first. Two of them leapt at the giant beast, claws aimed for its chest. The creature swung its arm, striking both attackers out of the air like insects. They crashed into the trees, splintering wood. The others charged, moving as fast as lightning, but the beast was faster. It slammed its claws into the ground, sending cracks across the clearing. The shockwave knocked several war creatures off their feet. Lyra held the injured being protectively as debris flew around them. She looked for a path to escape, but saw none. Bristle pushed himself up again, even though his body trembled. He couldn't fight something that size, but he was ready to try. Lyra hugged him tightly, begging him not to move. His growl softened, but his eyes stayed fixed on the beast. The injured creature beside Lyra raised its hand again. Its glow was faint, but it tried to summon whatever power it had left. Light flickered weakly between its fingers. Lyra whispered encouragement, but the creature shook its head, tears forming in its eyes. Its energy was nearly gone. It could barely sit upright. Lyra squeezed its hand, letting it know it wasn't alone. The leader of the war creatures jumped onto the giant beast's back, sinking its claws into the creature's neck. The beast roared again, twisting violently. It reached back with one massive arm, trying to pull the leader off. The leader held on, its strength impressive, but not enough. The beast slammed its back against a tree, crushing bark and shaking. Lyra stood with the glowing shard tightly in her hand, though her knees trembled and her breath came in quick bursts. The giant beast towered above everything, lifting the war creature leader as if it weighed nothing. Its arm rose higher, claws ready to strike. Lyra felt a wave of fear rush through her body, but something inside her refused to let her freeze. She stepped forward, her boots sinking into the soft earth. Bristle tried to lift himself, struggling, but Lyra motioned gently for him to stay down. His growl quieted, but his eyes never left her. The beast's red eyes flicked toward Lyra. It paused, confused by her sudden movement. The leader of the war creatures gasped for air, its claws scraping against the beast's thick plates. Lyra felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. She knew she was too small, too weak, too fragile for such a monster. But she also knew she could not turn back. The injured being behind her whispered softly, its voice trembling with both exhaustion and hope. Lyra held the shard tighter and took another step. The giant beast lowered its massive arm and bellowed at her, the sound shaking the ground. Leaves burst from branches as the air rippled. Lyra's ears rang painfully, but she did not stop. The beast roared again, leaning closer to the tiny human who dared to face it. Its breath smelled of metal and rot, blowing across her face like a hot wind. Its shadow swallowed her tiny frame entirely, but still she moved forward. The war creatures looked between Lyra and the beast, unsure of what they were witnessing. They had seen bravery before, real, ruthless bravery, but this was different. This was something they did not understand. A small, unarmored human facing a creature large enough to crush a tree. Something about that sight made their glowing eyes flicker with confusion, maybe even something close to respect. Lyra stopped only a few feet from the towering monster. Her heart thumped hard enough to hurt. She took one final breath, lifted the shard, and shouted with all the strength she had. Her voice cracked but did not break. The beast reared its head, startled by the sound. It lunged. Lyra jumped sideways just in time, and the beast's claws smashed into the ground where she had stood. Dirt and roots exploded upward. Lyra landed hard, rolling across the ground. The shard cut her hand slightly, but she didn't let go. The beast shook the ground with heavy steps as it pivoted toward her. It growled, lowering its body as if preparing to pounce. Lyra scrambled to her feet, her legs shaking. She held the shard out in front of her, hoping the glow meant something to the creature. But the beast roared and prepared to strike again. Lyra braced herself even though she knew she could not survive the hit. Before the beast could attack, Bristle hurled himself forward. His body was wounded, but his spirit burned hotter than ever. He slammed into the beast's leg, claws digging into the plates. The beast roared in anger, stepping back in surprise. Bristle kept attacking, darting between its legs, biting and clawing with everything he had left. His small size made him fast and unpredictable. The beast stumbled, trying to catch him. Lyra saw her chance. She ran toward the beast's exposed side. The glowing shard pulsed in her hand like a heartbeat. She drove it into the gap between the plates near the creature's lower chest. The shard slid in with a spark of light. The beast screamed, its entire body shaking violently. Lyra was thrown backward by the force of its movement, crashing into a patch of moss. She groaned in pain but looked up quickly. A soft glow spread from the wound. The beast clawed at the shard, trying to pull it out, but the light only grew brighter. It stumbled backward, bellowing in panic. The forest lit up with rays of strange white-blue energy that pulsed from the creature's chest. Lyra stared in awe. She had no idea the shard would do something like this. The injured being must have known. Its faint whisper earlier had not just been fear, it had been a warning and a plan. The war creatures stepped back, alarmed. The leader dropped to the ground, gasping as the beast released its grip to focus on the burning pain in its chest. The ground rumbled as the beast staggered, shaking its head wildly. The light from the shard grew so bright that the surrounding trees cast long shadows that danced like spirits. With a final, earth-shaking roar, the beast fell forward. The impact sent a burst of dust and leaves into the air. The forest trembled as its massive body hit the ground. For a moment, everything was silent. The glowing light slowly faded. The ground stopped shaking. The wind quieted. Lyra lay on her back, breathing hard. Her vision blurred, but she blinked it clear. Bristle collapsed near her, panting heavily. The war creatures slowly approached the fallen beast. They circled it, sniffing, prodding, inspecting. Their glowing eyes flickered with an emotion they had never felt before. They looked at Lyra. They looked at Bristle. They looked at the injured being. Then they looked back at the beast that had fallen because of a child, a creature, and something weak but powerful in its own way. The leader of the war creatures approached Lyra slowly. She froze, unsure of its intentions. It stood over her, towering like a dark cliff. It made a quiet clicking sound, softer than before, almost thoughtful. The creature lowered its head slightly, not in a threat, but in something that looked strangely like acknowledgement. It then turned toward the injured being and made the same sound. The other war creatures followed, each giving a similar gesture. Lyra couldn't believe what she was witnessing. The creatures who feared nothing had seen something new, courage in forms they did not expect. She felt her chest tighten with something warm, something hopeful. But she also knew this was not the end. The injured being still needed help. Bristle needed medical care, and the colony still didn't know the danger that lurked in the forest. The war creatures stepped back, as if waiting for what would happen next. Lyra carefully rose and held onto Bristle, unsure of what was coming, because something else was awakening, something even the fearless creatures did not understand. Lyra stood weakly, her legs trembling as she held on to Bristle's fur for support. The war creatures stood in a loose circle, watching her, watching the injured being, and watching the fallen giant beast. The forest was quiet now, almost too quiet, as if the world itself was waiting for what would happen next. The air smelled of dust and strange, glowing energy left behind from the shard's power. Lyra looked at the injured being, whose breaths were slow and shallow. Its pale skin flickered with weak light. She knelt beside it and gently placed a hand on its shoulder. The creature looked up at her, its wide eyes full of fear and exhaustion. It whispered something faintly, a word Lyra could not understand, but the emotion behind it was clear. It needed safety, it needed help, and it trusted her. Lyra squeezed its hand softly and whispered that she would get it out of the forest. She didn't know how, but she knew she had to try. The leader of the war creatures stepped forward. Its armor-like plates were cracked, and its movements were slower now, but its eyes glowed steady. It looked down at Lyra, then at the injured being. It made a low sound, not threatening but thoughtful, almost like a question. Lyra stared back, unsure of how to respond. The creature raised one clawed hand and pointed toward the distant colony walls. Then it pointed back to the injured being. Lyra understood. The creature wanted her to take it home. She nodded slowly. The leader blinked once, as if confirming the decision. The other war creatures stepped back, forming an open path through the forest. Lyra hesitated, shocked by their sudden cooperation. Creatures bred for war were helping her. It felt impossible, but in that moment something had changed inside them, something the giant beast had awakened, something Lyra's courage had reinforced. Bristle pushed himself up slowly. His legs shook, but he managed to stand. He nudged Lyra's arm, telling her he was ready. Lyra lifted the injured being carefully, cradling it against her chest. Its small frame felt lighter than before, almost weightless. She whispered that everything would be all right. The creature's hand tightened weakly around her sleeve. The leader moved beside Lyra, walking slowly with her as she started toward the path. Its heavy footsteps shook the ground, but this time they felt protective, not dangerous. The other war creatures followed behind, forming a silent escort. It was strange, seeing them walk without aggression. Their glowing eyes scanned the forest, watching for threats. Lyra felt a bit safer, though her heart still beat fast. As they moved, the forest changed. The glowing flowers dimmed and the floating dust settled. The air grew warmer, filled with the normal sounds of chirping insects and rustling leaves. Lyra recognized the trail ahead. They were getting closer to the colony. The walls were still far, but she could see the tops of the tall watchtowers through gaps in the trees. Suddenly, a distant alarm sounded. The colony had spotted them. Lights blinked along the walls. Human soldiers rushed to the fences, pointing weapons toward the silhouettes in the forest. Lyra froze. She held the injured being tightly as Bristle stood in front of her protectively. The war creatures stiffened, sensing hostility. Their claws extended slightly and their eyes brightened. The leader looked at Lyra, waiting for her next move. Lyra took a deep breath and stepped forward. She shouted toward the colony, calling for them to stop. Her voice cracked, but she shouted again. The soldiers hesitated. One of them shouted her name in surprise. Lyra waved her free hand, trying to show she was not in danger. Bristle growled softly, sensing her fear. The war creatures stayed close but did not attack. Their restraint surprised even themselves. Human soldiers advanced carefully, shields raised. When they saw the injured being in Lyra's arms, their expressions changed. Confusion replaced fear. The commander stepped to the front and demanded an explanation. Lyra spoke as clearly as she could. She told them about the crash, the beast, the fight, and the creature she now carried. Soldiers exchanged worried looks. The commander studied the war creatures with caution. But when the leader made no move to attack, the tension softened just slightly. Two medics rushed forward when Lyra motioned them over. They took the injured being gently from her arms, placing it on a floating stretcher. Lyra collapsed to her knees, exhausted. Bristle pressed against her side, offering silent comfort. The medics hurried the creature toward the colony gates. The commander gave a short signal, and the gates opened just enough to let them through. Lyra turned to the war creatures. The leader looked down at her, its glowing eyes steady and calm. It made a soft, clicking sound. Lyra didn't know its meaning, but she felt the tone. Gratitude, respect. Something no human had ever imagined these creatures could feel. Lyra bowed her head slightly. The creature responded with a nod, then slowly turned back toward the forest. The others followed, their heavy steps fading deeper into the shadows. They disappeared without another sound. Bristle leaned against Lyra, tired. She wrapped her arms around him and whispered how important he was.